Welcome back. A blowout quarter for Chevron with record earnings, record U.S. production, faster than expected integration with Hess, and a new deal with Microsoft to power up a data center in Texas. Joining me now is the chairman and CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth. Mike, great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Maria. It's good to be with you.
Well, it was an incredible quarter. Net earnings at $12.1 billion. That was more than $6 a share. The company's highest quarterly profit in at least 6 years on revenue of $70.1 billion, up 56% from a year ago. Can you give us the main takeaways of the quarter and what we should understand best about what took place in the last 3 months?
The story of the quarter is one of consistent execution, strong production, and record U.S. refinery throughput. We had assets around the world that ran at or near full capacity. We set a production record in the U.S. at nearly 2.1 million barrels of oil equivalent per day. We had record refinery throughput with runs greater than 1 million barrels a day, an all-time high here in the U.S., and several refineries set all-time records. All of that critically important at a time when the world energy system has been stressed and the need for supplies to markets and customers has never been higher. I'm really proud of our people in the quarter they delivered.
Yeah, congratulations. And you've been investing in this period. You know, one of the highlights, obviously, was much higher oil prices. And, Mike, that's because of this war in Iran. And I want to get your take on that, because the last time we spoke, there was serious worries about security, about ships transporting through the Strait of Hormuz. What can you tell us as this war has escalated once again?
Well, I'll start with your comment about growth. Our production was up 20% year on year, 5% just since the first quarter to the second quarter. So we have been investing to grow production and bring energy to the market. The issues associated with the conflict in the Strait continue, and there are new developments each and every day. We now see not only the Strait of Hormuz, but the Red Sea and the Black Sea have risks and uncertainties. So some of the challenges have expanded. And the risks to supply are very real. We've seen demand in the world remain pretty strong, and China is perhaps the unexpected part of the story in that they've been able to reduce their crude purchases, which has taken a little bit of the pressure off the demand side of the equation as supply has had these challenges and these risks. And so inventories have been drawn down around the world, whether it's strategic stocks or commercial stocks, and the situation remains somewhat fragile and uncertain.
Well, has the Iran conflict permanently changed how you view geopolitical risk and energy security at this point, Mike? I mean, we're worried about ships transporting and actually a shutdown in shipping for these refined products.
Our thinking on this is evolving. We've seen things like that happen over the past. I've been in this industry for 44 years. We've seen conflicts in the Middle East. We've seen conflicts in other parts of the world that have created issues for our industry. The industry responds in the short term with rerouting of supplies, and I think the industry's done well in this. The United States has been a big part of the story because as the biggest producer in the world, the biggest exporter now, to meet needs of our allies around the world, the U.S. has stepped up to be part of the answer here. Longer term, I think you will see some changes in the system. We are in discussions with Iraq about potentially entering 1 or 2 oil fields there, and part of those discussions would include a framework that would allow the construction of a pipeline that would go north and then move to the Mediterranean Sea and create a pathway for that production to get to market that would not have to go through the route today, which is through the Strait of Hormuz. And so I think you will see changes in the energy system. It's a little early to say what all of them are as we deal with what's still an evolving evolving set of circumstances.
Well, thank you for that, because I know now you've got the Houthis involved. They've been attacking assets near the Red Sea. You've got Egypt. So, Mike, what can you tell us about infrastructure that has been hit as a result of this war? Is there any reason to believe that it's going to take longer and longer to get that infrastructure back in place?
Well, it depends on the particular circumstances. In some cases, the hits are relatively easily fixed if it's piping or tanks. In other instances, if it's more sophisticated processing equipment, that takes more sophisticated and specialized manufacturing to replace that equipment, and the lead times on replacing that can be months or even years in some cases. And so I think the unfortunate thing is that energy assets have been targeted in this conflict, and what that means is it degrades the capacity of the energy system to meet global demand, and how quickly that comes back will be one of the things that determines when markets actually get back to some sort of a new equilibrium.
But Mike, you've said that given this disruption, you would expect oil prices to remain elevated for some time, right?
We've seen supply constrained, we've seen damage to infrastructure, and we have new risks that I think will be priced into the market on shipping, for instance. So shipping rates, shipping insurance, and the willingness of ship owners to go to certain ports in the world is likely to remain a question for some time to come. As I mentioned earlier, the inventories around the world have been drawn down. So some of the buffers that have bought us time and allowed markets not to increase the way some feared that they might, those buffers are greatly diminished, and the risks continue to present themselves. And so I think what that creates is a situation where the price pressure is more to the upside than it is to the downside. And so I do believe that we're going to see circumstances keep that pressure in place here for a time to come.
Mike, let me get back to the quarter, which was a blowout quarter, and your company's execution. It is also the one-year anniversary since you closed the Hess transaction, and you said in the quarterly analyst meetings that you've achieved 50% more synergies with $1.5 billion in synergies. Tell me what this Hess acquisition has done, given the importance of the Guyana facilities and opportunity that you are in right now.
The headline on Hess is what looked like a good transaction at the time we did it, looks even better today. The integration has strengthened our portfolio. We accelerated financial delivery with 50% more synergies 6 months earlier than we expected, so $1.5 billion rather than $1 billion, and mid-year 2026 rather than end of year 2026. We're seeing strong free cash flow, roughly double what the incremental dividend cost is. So we used shares to transact for the company. The dividend that we're paying on that share is only half of what the free cash flow generation has been. So the transaction is accretive on a per share basis on free cash flow. We've got a bigger, stronger portfolio. It enhances and extends our growth into the 2030s. And perhaps most importantly, we've added a tremendous talent to our workforce. The people that have joined us from Hess are already making a significant contribution. They've strengthened our workforce, and this is a tremendous combination.
That is wonderful, Mike. What can you tell us about the future and how sustainable these very strong numbers are? What are you expecting second half of the year? Also about production. Analysts want to know if you're going to be able to keep up this very strong production second half of the year.
We've guided to 7 to 10% production growth for the full year of 2026. That guidance remains intact. We are seeing strong underlying performance in businesses around the world and have every reason to believe that we will deliver that. That's on top of growth last year and the year before. So we feel very good about that. And the reason is the quarter was not a function of some unique set of circumstances in the quarter. We've been building a stronger portfolio for the last decade. A decade ago, a little bit more than that, our production in the Permian Basin was 100,000 barrels a day. Today, our production in the Permian is greater than 1 million barrels a day. A few years ago in the Gulf of America, it was less than 200,000 barrels a day. Today, it's well over 300,000 barrels a day. We've added a couple 100,000 barrels a day in the Bakken, 400,000 barrels a day in Colorado, in the DJ Basin. So we've steadily built a portfolio, particularly in the United States of America, that is much stronger than it was today, that's producing at a much higher level, and will continue to do so long into the future. We've guided to a 10% annual free cash flow growth over the years 2026 through 2030. So through the end of the decade, we've got underlying business improvement activities and production growth that will deliver value for shareholders and, most importantly, more energy for markets and consumers.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Permian, because I was with you at the Permian Basin and I saw Chevron's operations there in Texas, and it was incredibly impressive to see that you are continuing to tap into what has been incredibly rich content in the Permian Basin.
The Permian story just keeps getting better every year. This year, we expect to take the capital investment per barrel of oil and gas produced down by 25% from last year. And again, this comes on top of several years of performance improvements. So the story in the Permian Basin is strong and getting stronger.
You know, another part of this story that I just loved looking at with regard to the Chevron overall outlook is what you're doing with AI. Because this quarter, with your announcement of an agreement with Microsoft, tells us that Chevron is not just selling oil and gas. You're actually building AI infrastructure. Tell us about this 20-year deal that you're announcing with Microsoft.
I'm really excited about the deal that we've announced with Microsoft. We're helping power AI growth by delivering abundant, affordable, and reliable energy needed to scale AI. This is a 20-year power purchase agreement with Microsoft, one of the strongest companies in the world, for 2.7 gigawatts of capacity in West Texas. This is a behind-the-meter project. So what that means is we're not moving power through the grid and adding to the strains on the grid that are raising costs for ratepayers and creating reliability concerns. This is power that will be built off the grid, will be there to supply the Microsoft data center complex, and ultimately at full capacity will have the ability to provide power into the grid to help alleviate concerns for ratepayers. It takes advantage of the abundant Permian gas resource we were just talking about, and it's really differentiated from other announcements you see in the quality of the players involved in this, the scale. It's the largest, most advanced project of its kind, and it leverages Chevron's unique strengths. Our project execution capabilities, our strong balance sheet, our strong gas position, our long-standing relationships with people like GE Vernova and Microsoft. And importantly, we've already identified additional locations where we could do this again, and we're in conversations with potential customers about similar projects elsewhere.
Wow, that's incredible. So does a 20-year deal on AI infrastructure mean that Chevron's earnings are less dependent on the price of oil from day to day?
It's a very important attribute of this. These will be a steady stream of payments for the capacity that are uncorrelated to oil and gas prices. We're in a volatile industry. Right now, we're seeing very strong prices. 6 years ago, we saw negative prices. And prices in this industry cycle. They go up and they go down, and our cash flows reflect this. This is a project that will create a very steady stream of cash flows that will offset some of that volatility, that will hedge away some of that risk for our shareholders, and it's an interesting new model that we think has the potential to become a bigger part of our business.
Well, it's incredible. Over the last week, I've been interviewing lots of officials and executives on AI, and leaders from OpenAI and Anthropic have all told me that the bottleneck for AI is no longer chips, it's power. And that puts a company like Chevron in the catbird seat as we see this revolution underway. So is this going to be as important as perhaps any oil discovery that you could make over the years? Could this be that important?
Well, I think it's important. Our core business remains oil and gas, and the world consumes over 100 million barrels of oil every single day. And so we want to be sure that we keep our eye on what sits at our core. But this is an important new opportunity. If you think about AI, you really have the input is energy, and the output is intelligence. And in between, we've got data centers, we've got chips, we've got models, but the constraint on the system today is the power. We're helping to solve that constraint. The other thing that's interesting is you look at this and you look at past booms in telecommunications, in rail, in other infrastructure build-outs in the country. The technology in the middle sometimes cycles. There are early leaders, there are later companies that succeed, but the infrastructure is built and it's enduring, and it's where there's a lot of important value created. In this case, we're building 20 and 30-year assets that will endure through whatever happens with chips, which have a shorter life, continue to evolve, with the companies which likely will, have their own competitive dynamic that unfolds over this time. But a constant will be the need for that power, and that's the part of the chain that we're investing in.
Well, that's right. And that's what I'm wondering, if the Wall Street community understands that in terms of the sustainability, the strength, and the power of this deal. And you just suggested you're going to have more deals. Are more deals in the works with hyperscalers to power up data centers, Mike? And do you think investors are valuing this properly, given the potential for growth?
There are conversations underway. We've identified a number of additional locations. We've actually secured some of those locations and have begun early works on those. We're in conversations with a number of different large customers, the largest companies in the world. And I expect that you will see more deals. I think investors are just beginning to understand what that might mean for our company. I think they are interested to learn more about this and to see what other deals we can put together. But I think they're just now beginning to understand what it could mean.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Mike, did I miss anything that you'd like to add in terms of where Chevron sits today after this very strong quarter you've reported?
I think the one thing that I would mention is we've seen the administration take some actions that have been very helpful to markets. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve release has helped create supply. The waiver of the Jones Act has allowed us to move crude oil and products around the United States to markets where it's needed. There have been some specification relaxations, which creates more supply. And so the policy actions that have been taken are the right ones. They're the ones that allow the market to work better and allow industry to move products to where they're needed. And I think there have been voices that have suggested other actions which have not been taken, some of which I think would not be helpful. And so we continue to work with governments around the world to meet the moment, and we're committed to doing everything we can to get energy supplies to a market that desperately needs them.
All right. Well, President Trump has been walking this balance to try to end this war in Iran and get oil prices lower before the midterm elections, while also encouraging Congress to codify some of those executive orders with regard to permitting. Mike, is there anything you think the administration or the Congress should be doing differently in terms of codifying those so that things don't change every 4 years with a new president?
I think the biggest thing that Congress could do is pass permitting reform. This has been talked about for a long time, and there's something in it for everyone. If you like wind and solar, permitting reform is helpful for more renewables development. If you believe the grid is a problem, permitting reform is necessary for us to modernize the grid. If you believe oil and gas and pipelines are also part of the solution, permitting reform is essential there, because the current system has been weaponized to stop development of our industry. I think the administration has been a champion of unshackling free markets and allowing investments to flow into our economy, and we need to get a permitting system in place that enables that. And so I think that's the single biggest thing that could be done.
Understood. Congratulations on the great performance and execution, Mike, and thanks so much for being here.
Always good to be with you, Maria.
Good to see you. Mike Wirth is Chairman and CEO at Chevron. We'll be right back. You're watching Mornings with Maria, live on Fox Business. Stay with us.
We, every day, the last month, You've been under a lot of pressure. I think we did the right thing by you. So let's talk about what's happening right now. It's the AI boom, of course. And I got to say, listen, outside of building the pyramids, right, the world has never seen anything like this. And of course, we're not even sure who built or funded the pyramids. But think about this, right? Prior booms like this that ended in financial market disaster also enriched society. And this has always haunted market purists, right? And I think it's been a huge mistake to try to guess when the AI trade morphs into the next railroad or .com turndowns, right? It's way too early, folks. The better focus will be where is the AI investment most vulnerable? If you want to look at that, and that's something that I think is intriguing. And with that goes, of course, hand in hand with how much money and the role of federal government should that play, because they're really closely aligned. You know, as much as folks brag about the Roaring '20s, for instance, being the great example of free market dynamism, tariffs played an important role, in fact, a critical role. We had two tariffs back then, in fact. We had tariffs in 1920 and 1921. And so that brings me to the big market-moving story, one of them this morning. The administration is drafting a ban on Chinese data center devices, parts for these data centers. Now, the news has created an assortment of winners in today's session, particularly optical and chip names, absolutely on fire. This comes on the heels of speculation the administration may ban Chinese AI. This in the aftermath of Kimi K3, those monster games, right? From being 18 to #1 in some measures. Largely achieved, though, through stolen, borrowed, they call it distilled, Anthropic AI. Silicon Valley, ironically enough, has come to the defense of so-called open source AI. That's the Chinese model. But some say the only potential losers in such a scenario, if you had that, would be frontier names, maybe Anthropic, maybe OpenAI. But I got to tell you, there's a lot riding on frontier companies, right? Living up to the hype. Think about the earnings season. As much as we talk about how great they are, particularly these mega cap names, the best earnings season maybe in history, because it's not rebounding out of a recession. A lot of it comes from other income, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. Without that other income, the first quarter would have been 20%, this quarter would be 26%. Impressive, but still, you know, what's in that? Also consider revenue assumptions. Just here, this is AWS, for instance. They're assuming 59% last year, 60% this year. For the next 2 years, 55%. This is from Anthropic alone. And then from OpenAI, 20%, 16%, 13%. So many investors have maybe missed this rally, have taken unnecessary losses. I hope you haven't, but I'm sure many of you have. Mostly because the experts are so fixated on when this thing will end. These are the things I'm watching. In the meantime, each day, there are, of course, going to be fresh challenges. And of course, every day, we're going to be asking you a whole lot of questions, and hopefully the right questions.
All right, folks. Now, the question is, can the Republicans beat socialism in the midterms? That's the subject of the riff. Now, look, it may wind up being a huge gift to the GOP come November. But the far-left, socialist, anti-Semitic, anti-American Democrats, they had a field day yesterday in carrying these Michigan primaries. Of course, the leader is this Abdul El-Sayed, who won his Senate race by a cat's whisker, but he won it. He didn't get any black votes, I don't think. He didn't get any brown votes. He didn't get any working class votes. But he beat a regular Democrat who was backed by Chuck Schumer and Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So the El-Sayed Democrats, they're really no different than the Mandami Democrats or the Bernie Sanders Democrats or the AOC Democrats. It is interesting politically how fast the socialists have taken over in the last couple of years. And the issues are they're familiar and very bad for America. It's big government socialism. It's this Medicare for all, which is really a euphemism not simply for government control of health care, but frankly, for government control of the entire economy. Hence the flirtation not just with socialism, but really with communism. Of course, massive tax increases, the destruction and liquidation of wealth, the destruction of success, the end to individual initiative, the end to work incentives, open borders, anti-cops, anti-ICE. This crowd, by the way, raised taxes beyond your wildest dreams. They have no family values. There's no community. There's no tradition. Some of them want to abolish the Thanksgiving Day holiday. All they can talk about is transgenderism, and then there's Palestine. Oh, Palestine. Anti-Semitism is perhaps the driving, animating force behind this entire socialist movement. The biggest issue in the Michigan Senate race seemed to be the hatred of Israel, which, of course, levers off the anti-Semitism of Mamdani in New York, and it is catching on all the socialists. Our friend Ben Domenech calls it the Dems party of commie ISIS. Well put. He'll be here in just a moment to talk about it. Now, on the other hand, this is a great Republican opportunity if the GOP can seize it. The problem here is we're in a booming economy. All cylinders, manufacturing, technology, consumers, businesses, a roaring stock market today, another record. Trump accounts, the most popular thing going. But no one seems to know it, according to the best polls. I'm talking likely voters here, from ace Republican pollster John McLaughlin, all right? Among the best in the business. Not registered, not adults, actual likely voters who participated in the last elections, all right? The McLaughlin polls show, he asked, is the economy worse or better? Are you listening? 56% say worse. 37% say better. And then he goes on. Are the Trump tax cuts of last year good enough to improve the economy? Only 26% said yes. Boy, that sounds like a messaging problem. But you know what? It's a policy problem, too. Today, in the paper, old Reagan hand, my pal Bruce Thompson, and this was copied by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline. He notes, listen to this, Americans pay more in taxes than they spend on food, clothing, and housing. That's right. As of last year, $8,192 billion federal, state, and local taxes, and $7,388 billion on food, clothes, and housing. All right? That is not affordability. And I think that's got people down. They should be up, but they're not. Yet, the Republican Congress has completely bungled the budget. There's just a couple days left. No pro-growth tax cuts, no strong communication of the economic successes and the boom, no reform of the spending cuts. Today, I just saw the vice president talked about $56 billion of waste fraud. Why isn't that in the budget? Times 10 years, that would be $560 billion of spending cuts from waste, fraud, and corruption. Why isn't that in the budget? Anyway, if the GOP doesn't wake up, if the GOP doesn't start to develop some policies, if the GOP doesn't start to develop some significant messaging, then they may bungle not just the midterm election, but they may bungle the whole battle with this democratic socialism. And I can't think of anything worse for America. All right, that's the riff.
We hit an all-time stock market high.
Yep.
401ks are the highest they've ever been by double and triple. We have more people working in the United States today than ever in history. We're doing an unbelievable job. Costs are coming way down. I inherited, you know, they talk about costs. I inherited very, very high costs, and they're all coming down now. The food, the groceries, it's all coming down. We've done a great job.
The president gets affordability for sure. And I do think he tries to message to that point when he is, you know, either doing an interview or in front of the crowds, Larry. But still there's this feeling of the big, beautiful bill was last year. What have you done for me lately? I want to know what's coming next. And they don't necessarily see the GOP have, you know, anything big for them coming down the pike. And people are frustrated by that. While food costs are coming down, they're coming down slowly. And he did inherit a big fat mess. I don't envy him for that. But still, something is missing in the messaging of how the GOP is communicating with voters.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, first of all, the economy is booming. That's point number one. And it's booming across the board. And it's especially fun to watch it booming in manufacturing and construction. I know it's all about the new technologies and the power plants and the data centers. I get that AI. But it's also, as you said yesterday on our show, I mean, you've got industrial companies that are adapting to it. In fact, industrials themselves are doing very well, as are banks, financials. So it's across the board. Consumers are spending rapidly. You know, confidence surveys dominated by Democrats who hate Trump. So you see these terrible numbers come down. It's irrelevant. Consumers are growing at 3% a year. It's terrific stuff. Businesses, CapEx, capital goods investments, 10, 15% or more. Remarkable. Profits setting records. What did I see? Profit numbers from my pal, Ed Yardeni. 30%. S&P forward earnings consensus year ahead, 30%. Now, I know it's a forecast, but still it's a very big number. And the stock market, after being flat, has come back. So President Trump is right about so much of this story. But you're right, it's not resonating. Okay?
Why?
And that's a big problem. Well, I'm not sure I know why. I think a lot of it is poor messaging. You know, he can't do it alone. And I think the Congress is very confused, blundering, really not doing their job. The Republican majorities are sort of hung up on a lot of inside baseball, and they're not getting a message out.
It's always been that way.
They are, not always, but the leadership, it's particularly in the Senate, where there's, you know, it's a circular firing squad in the Senate. It's very bizarre. And you don't have a strong leader there. So there's no messaging, and I think they're blundering. I mean, I really think they're blundering very badly. I was looking, my pal, if I can pull this out, John McLaughlin, who was a very good pollster, and the reason I like him is he polls likely voters, okay? Likely voters, not adults, which is a ridiculous thing, and not even registered voters, likely voters. And he shows that people are just not happy. Hold on, I'm going to find this. Okay. Economy worse or better? This is McLaughlin, Republican pollster. 56% worse.
Yeah.
37% better. Now, the Trump tax cuts from last year, the One Big Beautiful Bill, which are having a really positive effect, but nonetheless, Trump tax cuts enough to improve the economy. Only 26% say yes.
Is that because messaging's missing the mark, though? Because I keep getting confused. I want to hear your thoughts on this with affordability. Affordability is not specific. I think the message is too complicated, and it needs to be reduced to paychecks. Is your paycheck getting bigger under President Trump and the Republicans? Yes. Is your paycheck going to get smaller under Democratic Socialists? Yes. Simple math, easy message. Are we just missing the mark? Because I look at Democratic Socialists, they have these radical ideas, and they have style, but they have style and social media. Is that enough to convince smart voters?
That is the difference, because you look at somebody like a Mamdani or an AOC or even a Bernie Sanders, and even when they are lying to you straight in the face, they will look you in the eye, and they've got this smile and this way of doing it and seizing onto the affordability, and life's not fair.
Yeah, with their hand on your wallet at the same time.
They're getting through.
It's more than style, though. We pay more in taxes. This is out today. Very important. We pay more in taxes than we do for food, clothing, and shelter. By an old Reagan friend of mine, Bruce Thompson, who was in the Treasury Department in the White House, was picked up by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. And the numbers, I don't know if I have the numbers, but it's roughly $8,500 versus $7,500. We pay more in taxes. People want to see more take-home pay. Now, your point is a very good point. The wage numbers are improving, but it's not the easiest sell. It's fairly recent, but I agree. That's part of the messaging problem. Look, they're bungling the whole budget stuff here. Look, you know, we're supposed to be draining the swamp and giving more people, allowing more people to keep more of what they earn, okay? So on the one hand, we should be using all the waste, fraud, abuse and corruption and institutionalize it and get it in a reconciliation bill so you can cut $700 billion over the next 10 years. And at the same time, it should be accompanied by additional tax reform, not least of which would be indexing capital gains and and increasing the allowance, the exemption for cap gains on the sale of a home. But in general, you could do more. You probably could do more. Lower the tax rate for middle-income people. Maybe you have to go back to tips and overtime and do more. Seniors, it's just, you know, it's like we said yesterday. Ordinary people don't sit around looking at the durable goods backlogs.
They don't.
Or your retail sales.
It happens to be
CPI,
it happens to be fabulous, but I don't think it really registers. And I'm not sure they look at forward earnings either, although I think the stock market is ultimately a very big plus for Mr. Trump. But it is a combination of messaging. The legislation is lousy. They're bungling what they shouldn't bungle. They should be much bolder.
So I have another question for you. Pardon me for following up here, but we talk about this idea of then why aren't the Republicans doing more, putting more in these bills, trying to push harder, sticking together while they have the majority to get things done, and somehow they're not able to do it. And also this idea that Republicans, they're not innocent in this because, to a certain degree, they realize affordability is the issue. They realize the platforms that these DS8 candidates are running on, and they say things. For example, the president saying the other day, it's not right that the oil companies are making so much money and they should give some money back to the people. You can't say that.
Well, you can.
You can, but
I've seen this movie before many times. Of course, there's what Mike Summers said last night from the Petroleum Institute. If you went back in COVID, prices were so low you couldn't. People didn't even want to store the stuff because it was so cheap. He says that. Like you, I wish he wouldn't say that. He sounds like Elizabeth Warren, but he doesn't really mean it.
Right.
He doesn't,
I
he
know,
just
but we're talking about messaging.
And they're going to reinvest in drilling and production and pipelining and refining. I mean, I'm not worried about that.
Well,
but let me come back to this. Taxes, look, this is affordability. Taxes are a lot about how much money do you keep of what you earn, okay? And this is from this study. $8,192 billion in taxes, $7,388 billion and food, clothing, and housing. I mean, really.
And that's a crazy statistic
taxes,
right there.
I mean, it's a very clever way to look at the thing. But it goes to, and people want more. They want to keep more of what they earn. That is a classic Ronald Reagan Republican and Donald Trump Republican issue. I've been saying it for about 5 decades now, okay? And we've done it. Now, you did a lot of it in the 2017 bill. You did a lot of it in last year's One Big Beautiful Bill. But you got to do more. And you got to keep pounding the message. You got to do more.
Yeah.
I know they're fighting a war. It takes up time. It takes up resources. He needs more help. Really, I don't forget who said this, which pundit said this, but Karl Rove, how's that? Karl Rove said this on our show this past week or something. Anyway, the individuals running the Senate races and they have to improve their messaging.
Yeah,
they have.
I
to
hear
do
you.
it.
He can't. Trump can't be the only one.
Right, that's the point.
Taylor, I want to bring you in on the markets because the markets are ripping, but we often say, even though more people are invested in the market than ever, that the markets are not the economy. Even though the economy is strong, that doesn't, devalue the way people feel.
Yes, except that maybe because Larry Kudlow's sitting here, the market is not the economy. The market is not the economy that if the market's at record high and I don't have a job, I still feel like crap. Except that, to Larry's always good point, when companies make money, profit, which is what drives the market higher, they get to decide, how do I want to spend that money? Sure, I could give you a dividend or buy back some stock, but I could also reinvest in my business or give you a promotion or give you a raise or hire more people. So the market is not the economy, except that higher profits and higher markets do impact the economy because then those companies feel comfortable hiring and spending and investing, and that drives the economy.
But the criticism.
The biggest winners are wage earners. The biggest winners are wage earners. And that's another point. I think Lou said it. They should emphasize that. I mean, now I heard Trump last night on the interview, and he said that stuff. I mean, I thought he did very well. It's just that there's not enough, repetition. Politics is like religion. You need repetition, and then you'll come to believe it, and you'll have faith.
Jackie, do you want me to give you a good statistic on that for repetition?
Sure.
Bank of America tracks customer deposits. Customer deposit account data suggests labor momentum strengthened further in July. Payroll growth accelerated 2% year over year, up from 1.7% in June. Lower income households saw after-tax wage growth accelerate 5.2% in July, surpassing all other higher income households. So it's there. The data is there.
But we're back to a messaging problem because
But they could make the case.
The big corporations, also people demonize them and say, well, they're sitting on their cash. They're not reinvesting it. They're not hiring. It's not filtering through to the bottom line.
We're going to talk about this Marxism stuff in a moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to save it for that. But I'm just saying this is winnable. Don't get me. I don't want to come out as a pessimist. I'm critiquing it, and the polls are the polls. You asked about it, and McLaughlin's likely voters are very important. Fabrizio uses likely voters. I think Mark Penn often uses likely voters, and they're the best pollsters in the country. All these other polls are nonsense. But this is all right. We're in early August and so forth. They have a midterm convention in early September in Dallas, a couple days. They have time to make the case. And the Democrats, I think, are giving them gifts. This whole Marxist Islamist nexus that's developing in the Democratic Party is not going to sell well in this country. So there's that. And so I'm still an optimist.
That is a lot, I would say.
But to your point, I mean, it isn't fabulous. Yeah. I acknowledge that.
Okay, Lydia, final thoughts?
I see so much of what we're talking about in the message that needs to be communicated. And I'm just thinking about the recent trip that I took down to South Carolina to cover the expansion of aluminum smelting. And it's a big product of President Trump's agenda that they're able to expand and invest. Talk about bringing back jobs in manufacturing. Those are some really good paying jobs. And you should have seen the local community celebrating what it means for them. Those are workers that are going to feel the benefits. I mean, these are six-figure jobs.
Sorry. No, please. I didn't mean... shut up, Larry.
No, we want to hear from you.
I was only going to say, to your point, which is a terrific point, which Trump was making last night, these are trades jobs.
Right.
These are not PhDs in sociology or, heaven forbid, economics. These are welders and electricians and carpenters and so forth who work their tails off. These are people that put pipes together and make the water cycle run. And the net effect is the communities see a tremendous economic improvement, which filters right through jobs and wages and families and the whole 9 yards. And ultimately, in many of these states, they're using the extra revenues to cut local property taxes and things like that. Ms. Trump made that point last night. That's a terrific point, okay? You just have to keep doing it. My point is it's there for the GOP. Look,
right, beat the drum.
I'd rather run in any election with record stock markets, with record jobs, with more people working, with virtually no employment except frictional employment, okay? And I'd rather run when I had a lot to say about cutting back democratic big government socialism, fraud, and corruption. I'd rather run on all that. They just got to run on it.
Okay, we've got to run.
Oh, it's the political story of the summer, the socialist surge. 3 hard left winners in New York Democrat primaries. A socialist in the Wisconsin gubernatorial election who says Thanksgiving troubles many people and should be cancelled. In Michigan, Abdul El Sayed, the doctor who favors government-run health care for all. The story is not that they won. It is how far left the socialists will pull the rest of the party. The danger for the Democrats is that they will be associated with the left's craziest ideas. They need an intervention. You can't win an election if your party embraces no prisons, no deportations, no police, pack the Supreme Court, cut the military, and open the borders. Those are 80-20, if not 90-10 issues, with the socialists on the wrong side. The early signs are that Democrat leadership will try to accommodate the left, Chuck Schumer now welcomes El Said into what he calls the big party, the big tent party. There's room for everyone. He wants to harness the youthful energy the socialists have brought into campaigning, but he'd better be careful because the socialists want to take over the whole party. And then there's Gavin Newsom, the California governor. He'll be in Michigan this weekend. He's flying in to be the unifier of the party. He wants the publicity, but he'd better be careful too, not to get too associated with the crazies. It wouldn't look good when you run for president in 2028. So who can save the Democrats from themselves? No one with real authority has stepped forward so far. It's more likely that there's going to be a vicious, behind-the-scenes fight for the soul of the party. Not good for the midterms, which are now less than 3 months away.